One day, my boss came to me and said, "I challenge you to build a shed out of trash." And I'm gonna do exactly that. I made a shed almost entirely out of your trash. Well, not specifically you, more of a collective you. I spent a couple weeks gathering materials from my typical pallet spots, Facebook Marketplace, the Restore, Cole lumber carts, your mom's house, friends and neighbors, and various dumpsters. More details on all of that later as I build my trash shed. But I gathered all of the lumber, plywood, doors, windows, insulation, more windows, another door, more lumber, an enclosed 6x14 trailer. Would somebody please change my Facebook password? Huge thanks to Carolina Shoe for making this video possible. Your next favorite pair of boots is available at carolinashoe.com. Link, along with a discount code, is down below. It all starts with the floor and foundation, which in my case is pressure-treated 2x6s for the floor frame. I scored a handful of these from the Cole lumber cart at Lowe's, and the rest I had to buy new along with the 4x4 skids. I trimmed the skids down to exactly 16 feet long and beveled the bottom corner to hopefully make the shed easier to move. Now I'm building this on top of skids so that the shed can be relocated down the road, but I want to get this built before the winter, and due to town regulations, this is where I have approval to build it for now. I pick a relatively level spot in my yard, starting with the skid nearest the property line so I can properly measure the setback. If needed, I make them level by shimming the ends of the 4x4s up with bricks set into the dirt and adding bricks every few feet along the 4x4 to support it. Once the outside skids are confirmed level and square with one another, I add 2 more center skids for extra support, and I make sure they're all in line and level with the first 2. Ideally, I'd want a gravel pad under the shed for moisture control, but we'll worry about that in the spring, when I hopefully have approval to move the shed. My rim joists are trimmed down to exactly 16 feet long, just like the skids, and I take the opportunity now to lay out my 16-inch on center floor joist spacing. The floor joists are trimmed down too. I want the depth of my shed to be exactly 12 feet, so I need the joist to be 3 inches less than that to account for the 1.5 inches of rim joist on either end of them. This is going to be a 16 foot by 12 foot shed, 192 square feet, pretty big, but just under the magical 200 square feet where more paperwork gets involved, permits and whatnot. So it's the perfect size. Plus 16 by 12, it works very efficiently for materials, as you'll see later. With the floor frame complete, hurricane ties are added to tie the skids to the floor joists. This also allows me to lock in the skid spacing perfectly and straighten out any of the floor joists that might be warped, which is most of them. I added 1.5 inch square pressure treated stock spaced 2 inches down on both sides of each joist. This is going to hold my floor insulation, which will be made up of rigid foam. I was lucky enough to be able to find one of these sheets on the Cole cart, and the rest I got for free from a kind neighbor who had a bunch of this tapered stuff that was reclaimed from under a rubber roof. Doubling those sheets up gave me the 2 inches of insulation that I was looking for, so it was perfect. I used Type-On Fast Set construction adhesive to hold the Advantech floor sheathing in place on top of my insulated floor. Now this is going to be a trash shed, but my other goal was to make it not look like a trash shed, like a lot of my projects. This isn't just a shed, this is a Jackman shed, and whatever you think that means, you're right. This premium floor sheathing someone used for temporary flooring in their new addition that they just completed, so for a great deal, I scored that, basically brand new, with just a few screw holes in it, along with all of the nails I need for this project, both framing and sheathing nails that you see me using now. Plus house wrap, and a bunch of scrap plywood and lumber. With the floor all wrapped up, I move on to the roof? Yep, I'm building my own roof trusses, and this flat, clean floor is the perfect place to build them. Trusses were built entirely for free from this pile of lumber debris that I found on Marketplace that came from a torn down addition. It just took a little time to gather all that material and to clean everything up and remove all the nails and screws. Just a few of them. Oh, and of course I found some 2x6 pallets too, and I couldn't say no to those. It's just a few more nails. It's funny, these people are all thrilled to get rid of this material, and I'm happy to have it, and it stays out of the landfill. A big win for everyone, and it honestly wasn't that much extra work. So from my collection of trash lumber, I pull out anything 2x6 or larger and cut it to rough length. But now that they're all a more manageable size, anything that isn't a 2x6 already is turned into a 2x6. And the benefit of this is that I can remove a lot of the ratty edges and make ugly, useless pieces usable again. The gusset plates for the trusses came from some old plywood garage shelves that I found, took apart, and cut down to size, adding angles that match the angles of my shed roof, which just so happens to be the same angles of the roof of the barn that my workshop is in. That's a funny coincidence. The rafter, or truss cords, I'm not really sure what to call them, but they're cut down to final size and angle to match what I drew in my drawing. To verify that my drawing is correct, I check the layout on the width of my floor, and of course it's right. So I go to town and cut the remainder of the rafter truss cords down to size. I'm adding a seat cut at the end of the lower rafter, which will help register the trusses in place later, and also help me secure everything together. I cut one with my circular saw and finished the cut, and then used that as a master to trace the seat cut on all of the other lower rafters before I cut all of them out. Now here's the real magic of laying out your trusses on your floor. Not only can you draw and snap lines on the floor to help line everything up, but you can temporarily add blocks to line up the rafters exactly where you want them. These first two blocks lock in the seat cut, and the rest lock in the position and angle of the rafters. Now that is used as a template to hold all of my rafters while I glue and nail them together, making each truss identical to all of the rest of them. I built them as a single U-shaped piece, which makes installation nice and simple, and at 6 feet tall and 12 feet wide, they're just barely small enough for me to easily move around by hand. And with those all built, just like that, the blocks go away, and it's like I was never there. With all that out of the way, I can finally build some walls. These are a mix of materials. The long 16-foot bottom and top plates come from these insane 20-foot long pallets that I managed to find and somehow get home with me. Tearing these apart was a bit of a chore and just a few more nails to remove. But this kept my lumber bill at a whopping $0, along with the 2x4s from some normal-sized pallets, the studs I scored from the pile of lumber debris, and even some from dumpsters, like these fancy painted studs from a parkour gym that just closed down and was throwing away these basically new 2x4s from their obstacles, plus a basically brand new tow ball? Yeah, I'll take that too. With all that stuff taken apart and all the various bits of metal removed, I set aside all the pallet slat pieces for a future part of the shed. See if you can figure out what that might be. And then I sort all of the 2x4s by length. I also managed to score some 8-foot long 4x10s from my contractor neighbor for free for my window and door headers. And I found just enough sheets of used 1/2-inch OSB and plywood on Marketplace for my wall sheathing. Hold on, time out. I know exactly what you're thinking. How am I qualified to teach you about building a shed? I'm just a woodworker. Well, that's where you're wrong. You know me as a woodworker, but you may not know I also have professional vocational training and years in construction under my belt. So honestly, nobody could be more qualified than me.
In this video, I'm going to show you how to build a DIY shed from scratch, step by step for beginners.
Alright, wall's complete. Back to the banana cart. I decided to build a full ceiling frame on top of the walls to create a storage loft upstairs. So between the coal cart, dumpsters I found randomly behind buildings, plus the lumber debris pile from earlier, I'm able to find my entire ceiling frame, except for the two 16-foot long rim joists. While I'm prepping my ceiling lumber, let's talk about Carolina Shoe for a second. As one of the longest supporters on my channel, they're still here for a reason, because I genuinely love their boots and have worn them every day now for a decade. You see me wearing a few of my favorite styles in this video: the Force slip-on with a composite safety toe, the classic Bruno, which is a nice broad safety toe, and the Amp, which is a moccasin toe style, which is made in the USA at their factory in Pennsylvania. They're constantly coming out with new styles and refreshing their lineup, so if you've checked them out before, it's worth checking them out again. Long-lasting, comfortable work boots, and they're great inside the workshop or outside while you're building a shed out of trash, or great if you're climbing in dumpsters to get trash to build a shed out of trash. Check out the link down below to carolinashoe.com, and down there you'll also find an exclusive limited-time discount just for the viewers of this video. Huge thanks to Carolina Shoe for making this video possible. Now, let's get this ceiling frame installed. I add some temporary blocks to the back wall to make sure that my rim joist doesn't topple off while I'm building my ceiling frame, but the rest is easy. Just lift each joist up, nail it in place on my 16s on one end, and then once they're secured on that end, adjusting the spacing on the other end of them and nailing them all in place. I also use some angled toenails down into the wall's double top plate to hold the ceiling frame assembly down to the wall. Now, I didn't forget to leave an opening to access the storage area. I left the center joist out, and now I'm framing an opening for the exact size needed for an attic access ladder, because, yeah, I found one of those on Marketplace. If you think that's overkill for this project, you must be new to my channel. But also, you're not wrong. With that opening installed, I add mince-band blocking, which not only helps stabilize the joist and prevent lateral buckling, but also lets me fix any of the bananaed boards that I picked off the Cole lumber cart earlier. Other than the giant front door, the windows and door openings aren't really openings yet, so I fix that now. I drill a starter hole in each opening, and then use a 1/4-inch flush trim router bit to perfectly cut the sheathing out of each of the openings. So window holes are good, but the storage loft floor is almost entirely holes now, which is not good. My buddy Paul gifted me with these really nice plywood pallets. I promise I'm not talking about myself. These, along with various 3/4-inch thick OSB and plywood scraps from shelves and desks that I found in my travels, were enough to cover the whole ceiling. Not quite as nice and luxurious as the perfectly flat floor made from tongue and groove OSB, but I think the aesthetic of my patchwork plywood ceiling is far superior. Speaking of holes, there's some at the top of my walls that I don't want. I hung the wall sheathing low so that I could tie it in with my floor system, so now I infill the top with my leftover pieces of wall sheathing. I got a little too eager on the short side of the shed. I should have left those pieces off and just hung the sheathing on my gable ends down low to better tie them into my ceiling and lower walls. But it's too late. I'll just add some long structural screws later instead. But one place where I successfully thought ahead was at the bottom of the walls, where I left the sheathing up 1.5 inches so that I could add strips of pressure-treated wood to keep the sheathing separated from any moisture from the ground. That gets held in place with stainless nails. Last thing needed to wrap up these bottom walls is some house wrap, which not many people know, but when you install it upside down, it sheds water better. That's not true, but you believe me for a second. What is true is there's shorter 3-foot long rolls which are easier to handle when you're working by yourself, but this barely used 9-foot roll is what I found. So I get to wrestle around with that now and debate with myself the whole time whether the cost savings were worth it or not. Maybe. With that all behind me, I'm back to the roof that I started earlier. If you're really paying attention, and I know that you're not, you will have noticed that all of these trusses have gusset plates on both sides, except for these top two trusses. These two will be my gable ends, so no gusset plates on the outside face. I want to infill these with walls, which I will start down on the ground, where it's much more comfortable to work. I start with the gable wall bottom plate with the correct angle on each end, and then cut the top plate pieces to match the size needed to perfectly fit on the bottom edge of each of the rafters. Now, this may not be the way that normal house framers do it, but it's the Jackman way. On each end of these top plate pieces, I cut out a 3/4-inch wide pocket, 1.5 inches down from the top face to create a pocket so that each of these top plates fits perfectly around the inside gusset plate on my truss. This makes everything super secure and seamless and gives me a perfectly flat face to attach my wall sheathing and studs to later. One architectural detail I haven't discussed yet is located at the end of my rafters, which is a rafter flare, which actually matches the roof line of the barn. This is done by scabbing on an extra piece to the bottom of the rafter, which is a perfect use for a bunch of my short scrap pieces. A long steep angle is cut on my bandsaw, and I use the miter saw on the shorter, small angles. Temporarily, Temporarily, I screw a pair of these to my gable end rafters. This will help with the next step, which is pre-building my flying rake. That's really just a fancy term for a roof overhang on the gable end of the building, but like everything else, I pre-build those on the ground because it's easier, and I have the angles of the gable end truss to reference off of. I build 4 sets of these, a pair for each gable, before setting them aside for later. And slowly, one step at a time, lifting my gable ends up onto the ceiling, where I can center them and line them up 3.5 inches in from the short edge. I toenail the bottom plate in place to anchor it so that the gable wall doesn't fall down to the ground when I lift it up vertical, something that would be suboptimal. Getting these locked in place also allows me to snap lines where each stud will go, so that I could figure out my stud length and location at all of these weird angles. So that long 2x4 that you saw me screw across the gable ends, that's actually temporary. On the ground, I mark my 16-inch rafter spacing on it and pre-install some screws at each rafter location to make truss insulation super easy. Once the trusses are up on the ceiling, it's super easy to just slide them in place and position them perfectly using my temporary 2x4. Before anything was up there, I also pre-marked out my 16-inch spacing along the edge of the ceiling where all of the trusses sit. So then I can easily line up my ends too. It's almost like I know what I'm doing. Almost. To permanently hold each truss in place, I add a handful of angled toenails on each end, plus one of these long orange truss screws, which is designed exactly for this, tying trusses into the wall or ceiling frame below them. Except usually they're installed the other way around, from down below, but this will be equally as secure, and is one of the main reasons that I left the rafter flares off for now. We snapped a line to help establish the bottom of my first course of roof sheathing, which I found lightly used on Marketplace. This line marks the top of my rafter flare, which just happens to be exactly 4 feet down from the roof transition, because I designed it that way. Notice the temporary nails that I used to hold these sheets in position right on the line? Pretty clever, right? It is, but it turns out that I'm not so clever. These sheets are thicker than my wall sheathing, 5/8 of an inch, and they're a bit damp and heavy, so getting the upper sheets up on the roof was pretty tricky. It took me doing this on the first side to realize doing it the other way around would be easier, because that gives me a place to stand on the ceiling while I install the sheets on the roof. Well, you go to school on the first one. Someone famous said that. Wayne Gretzky, maybe? With the big sheets of roof sheathing taken care of, I don't need to stand on the edges of the ceiling anymore, so I can install the rafter flares now and install the last strip of roof sheathing. These little tail pieces are held in place with construction adhesive and nails. I also add gusset plates, just like the rest of the truss. Definitely overkill, but it's on brand. Plus, these pieces of plywood were my offcuts from the other gusset plates. And with that architectural flair added in, my shed is really starting to look like a baby barn. Barn. With the flares installed, the rafter ends now need wall sheathing on them to make them flush with everything else. So I add that now using my window cutout pieces. I can also now wrap around the last little end of the house wrap that's been annoying me while I listen to it flap around in the breeze for the past few days. But this is made better by my IsoTunes Bluetooth hearing protection, specifically the free Aware that you see me wearing for this whole build. If you click that IsoTunes link that's down below, you'll get some extra savings, especially if you're watching this before April 21st. They protect my hearing while letting me listen to podcasts, so I can avoid thinking about how difficult I'm making this project for myself. Normal, lazy people install what are called bird boxes, or even just little triangular trim pieces. but I personally find those ugly. Instead, I built out these, which are eaves returns that wrap the roofline around the gable end of the building and terminate them there. The shop barn has a full eaves return, but I don't want the shed to look too identical to it, so I do a partial eaves return instead. The partial eaves return will also factor into a siding detail that I plan to add later on that'll really tie the whole gable ends together. While I'm up on the ladder, I punch out these upper windows. That'll let things breathe and dry out up here because it has rain. What will fill this hole is a future project, refurbishing these free window panes that I found, building a frame for them, and installing hinges so they can be opened in case we ever want access to store some long items up in the attic space. Finally, it's roofing time. I have a sneaking suspicion that we have some nasty winter weather on the way, so I'm fighting to get this thing weather tight before the patented Cape Cod mix of slushy snow and sideways rain shows up. This starts with drip edge along the bottom edge of the roof. I add some sealant at the seams for extra insurance. I found this drip edge on Marketplace, along with a couple rolls of ice and water underlayment. Pre-cutting this underlayment to length is the smart move here, because you don't have to... Hey! Look in front of you.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
As I was saying, this way you don't have to deal with the whole awkward heavy roll up on the roof. Instead, I have much easier to handle 19-foot long sections. Now this stuff is self-adhesive, so normally you just have to be very careful when you stick it down and put it exactly where you want it. But in my case, it's below freezing right now, so it needs a little bit of help until the sun bakes it a little bit. I use roofing nails in a handful of locations to help hold it in place. This makes things easy for us, and the backing plastic being split down the middle helps out big time for install too. Drip edge goes on the gable end after the underlayment, and you can see I cut it here so that it runs long so that the outermost corners meet at a point. But the small flat face of the drip edge also wraps under the first piece to help make that seam tighter. I have this 1-inch spacer block that I'm using to hold all of my drip edges off my framing, 3/4 of an inch, the thickness of my trim boards, plus a little air gap. The gap helps water drip off the drip edge and not just run down your trim. Normally, you'd want to install all of your trim first, but I just want to get this thing weather tight, so I decided to roof it now and deal with all the trim later. Shingling starts with a starter strip, which gives you a glue line down the edge of the roof. 6 inches is cut off of the first one so that the seam doesn't line up with the shingle going on top of it. Another piece of starter strip goes on top of that, running vertically up the roof. I hang both of these a 1/2 inch off the drip edge to create another drip line to help the water cleanly shed off the roof. With all the prep work done, I can now get to actually shingling. Shingles were acquired for free when I was buying wall insulation from someone on Marketplace. They had a dozen bundles of these shingles that they wanted out of their way, which happened to be exactly what I need for my shed. So here we are. The first shingle is installed like normal, and then the next course is marked and cut 6 inches shorter to avoid the seams overlapping. Each shingle is lined up with the reveal line of the shingle below it, and then the next shingle gets cut back 12 inches to create a step pattern in the seams. And then I run these first few courses across the length of the roof. I found that 4 courses were the perfect amount to cover up the roof flare, and I'm only going that far for now, so then I can get my roof bracket staging installed. This is nailed into the rafters just above where the next course of shingles will overlap. This staging allows us to install the rest of the rows of underlayment safely. The self-adhesive ice and water is going over the entire roof, which is overkill. Usually you just do a row along the bottom and up the edges, but this is me that we're talking about. Plus there's actually some logic this time. I had to buy both rolls when I got it from Marketplace, and 2 rolls is exactly enough to cover the whole roof, so it didn't make sense to go out and buy regular underlayment paper and have leftovers of both ice and water and regular underlayment. This also waterproofs the roof for now and buys me time to get these shingles on. Well, almost. Turns out with 2 rolls I was 2 feet short. Window flashing tape. That's close enough. With the remainder of the underlayment installed, I can now install my drip edge on the rest of the gable ends of the roof. These outside corners are nice because you can just fold it over the corners while creating a small overlap on the face when you cut it. Forget your caulking and you're too lazy to climb off the roof? I know I am. Good thing I have a chalk line and my dad on the ground as a gopher. That's what we call them in the industry. Go for this, go for that. I hop back off the roof and the staging planks come off temporarily to install a few more courses of shingles. The staging allowed us to get the underlayment on, but if you shingle while standing on it now, you're working by your feet, and that's not very comfortable. So this buys me a bit of height, working up as high as I can reach from the ground staging. And with my roof staging back up, I have one more thing to figure out before I start shingling again. Gambrel roofs like this one are a bit tricky because you want to hit the transition point with a full shingle, which takes a bit of math. Here's from the last course, the transition, 32 7/8. Reveal is 5 5/8. Divide that 32 7/8 by 5 5/8. That's like 5.8 8, round it up to 6, divide that number by 6, that's 5.5, so your new reveal is 5.5 from here to the transition. And then you get a full course right there on the money. So for the next 6 courses, my new reveal is shrunk down a tad from 5 5/8 to 5.5, an adjustment you'll never notice once the roof is done. We snap lines to mark where the top edge of the shingle should go. This not only gives me a reference point for my new reveal up to the transition, but it's also a good idea to do this anyway every handful of courses to make sure that you're still running straight and parallel with the roof. The transition shingle is a little tricky as it doesn't naturally want to fold over at that angle, so it takes a little bit of persuasion to make that happen. It's still quite cold, so I have a few of these warming up in the sun to make them a little bit more pliable, and then I use the edge of my staging plank to begin establishing that fold. I'll worry about making that look perfect later, but for now, I can just go to town and run up the rest of the roof like normal until I hit the ridge. At the ridge, I need a 1-inch opening on each side of my sheathing to vent the roof. But would you look at that? It's already there. I actually designed this rafter to be 4 foot 1 inches long specifically to account for this. Normally at this point you just put a junky old saw blade in your circular saw and cut the 2-inch space out of the ridge of your roof. But all I have to do is cut the extra shingles out of the way and skip that step. The ridge vent is this rolled mesh material, and you want to be sure to not pinch the mesh when you nail it. So I turn down the power on the nailer and also install this included adapter that is meant to leave the nail loose when installing vinyl siding, but it's perfect for this too. I cut my first cap shingle down to function as a starter strip with the glue line along the edge of the roof. Then it's just 1 nail on each side of each cap shingle. The end of the roof takes some extra care, reversing the last cap shingle after installing 1 last starter strip piece. And then the final shingle is what was cut off of the starter shingle, and that's just face nailed to the roof. You want to seal those face nails up with some roofing cement or caulking. You can get color match stuff, but I just used what I had, and to help those black blobs blend in with the rest of the roof, the trick is to just take a couple of scrap shingles and rub them together, which makes the granules fall off, and then they just stick to the wet cement, and you'll never know it's there. I'm going to speed up this process a bit by warming up the shingles with my propane torch, and then melting the glue line that comes installed on the underside of the shingle, being careful not to melt the shingle itself. I hold it down long enough for the glue to solidify, and now I don't have to wait until the spring for my roof to look perfect. And we wrapped up the roof just in time. A rare December snowstorm hit us the next day. I figure now is probably a good time to pull off the roof staging. The staging planks come off, and the roof brackets just have these keyhole slots in them, so they just need to be bumped up with a hammer, and they pop right off the roof. I hammer the framing nails down flush, and they just live in the roof now, and you'll never know they're there, unless you watch this video. Well, I guess it's time for windows now. Just a few short days later, the snow's all melted, per usual. And it's just finishing dripping off the roof right where I'm working. I prepare the opening by cutting away all excess house wrap. The sides simply get stapled, but at the sill, I create a sill pan. This starts with a length of clapboard siding, which is tapered. This guides away any potential water intrusion from the inside of the building to the outside. The windows are first dry fit to check how they fit the opening. It's nice to have 2 people for lifting large windows like this, and then 1 person on the inside to make adjustments. We slide the window to its left and rightmost extremes, and I mark that on the wall so that I can later position the window perfectly in the center. With the fit confirmed, we remove the window, and I finish prepping my sill pan with this stretchy window flashing tape. This allows you to create a seamless seal all the way around the sill without the cuts at the corners that you have to do with normal flashing tape. Some skinnier flashing tape is also added to the top of the opening just to create some separation between the window and the window caulking is applied a couple inches in on the sill to create a dam in case any water makes its way inside the window opening. The left, top, and right side of the window get caulking where the window flange will sit, leaving the bottom without caulking to allow any of that potential water intrusion to have a way to escape out the bottom of the window. The window is reinstalled in the opening, and it's checked for level, shimmed as needed by the person inside the building, checked for alignment with the adjoining windows, and then I nail the bottom 2 corners in place. Next, I check to make sure the window is square, plumb, and also parallel with the other windows. And once that's verified, the top corner gets nailed in place too, to lock the window in position. Then all of the rest of the holes in the window fins receive a nail. A little bit more flashing tape now, first on the sides and then on the top of the window. You just need to think like a water droplet here. Gravity is undefeated, and that'll help you figure out what order to install everything in. The house wrap then layers over the top to guide any water over the top of the flashing. And lastly, the corner cuts are sealed up with a little bit more flashing tape. Those 2 rear windows came from a contractor neighbor of mine who had taken them out of a house and had these as extras that he needed out of the way. The flashing tape came from eBay, and the gable end gets another pair of windows. Shout out to my buddy Mike, Mike for generously donating these to the trash shed. Literally brand new, still in the wrapping. They were misorders from his recent house remodel. All free windows. Way too nice for a shed, but perfect for my trash shed. It's the same operation on this side of the shed, but a little faster now that I remember the process. Test fitting the window, preparing the opening, caulking and installing the window, and taking a million measurements before fastening it in place. The help is getting in my shot again.
Cheese puff?
No, the audience doesn't want cheese puffs. Back to work. One more window to install, and then these both get flashed at the same time. Well, Jackman, that was quite the score on the windows. Bet you can't do that again with the door. Ha! Never doubt me. On one of my trips last month to the local Habitat for Humanity restore, gathering materials for the shed, I found this beauty, a previously used but still in great condition, custom-made exterior solid wood mahogany door. Yeah, you heard me right. It's a really weird size, a bit taller and skinnier than a normal door, but I made the opening to fit the door, so it really doesn't matter. At a minimum, it's a $3,000 door new, and I got it for 60 bucks. All right, fine. I'll stop bragging. It did take a bit of work. This thing was built for a 2x6 wall, not my 2x4 walls, so the frame has to go on a diet. There are also some random bits of metal, evidence left behind by its previous installer, so that gets removed first. To prep it for getting cut on the table saw, I add some 1-inch spacers to account for the threshold being wider than the jamb. Just some blue tape with CA glue to hold them temporarily. That way it runs smoothly on the fence without hitting threshold. Well, I'm not entirely sure what tripped the brake there, but this cheap door just got a little more expensive. A few moments later, the top gets cut, and then the spacers and the cutoff pieces of the jamb are removed so that I can cut down the threshold too. An unavoidable curve cut that I created is filled in, the jamb is sanded, hinges reinstalled, and this thing is now ready for my shed. Just like the windows, the door opening gets prepped with a bunch of flashing tape. Normally, exterior doors come with trim on the outside, called brick molding, that holds the door frame flat against the wall. But I don't have that, so I install these temporary blocks to hold my frame flush with the wall. Similar to the windows, I do a dry fit, apply a generous bead of sealant along the sill, and reinstall the door in the opening. Shimming starts with centering the bottom of the frame within the opening, pinning that in place with long finish nails, then plumbing the hinge side of the jamb. Shims are also added at the middle hinge, and one of the screws from each hinge is removed and replaced with a long screw to secure it directly to the studs. On the other side, the striker plate also gets shimmed and fastened, and then all the extra shims are trimmed off, the temporary blocks are removed, and a few more screws are installed to fine-tune the fit. The gap is filled with window and door foam, which will later be covered by trim. That's future Jackman's problem. But first, it's time to celebrate, because this shed is weathered. Wait a second, one more gaping hole needs to be filled. Temporarily, I install some 2x2s around the perimeter of the front opening and use my last little bit of salvaged plywood to cover the opening for now. A future video is going to be building these doors. Still gotta decide sliding or hinged. What do you think? Also on the list is exterior trim, siding, attic windows, and insulation too, so this thing is prepped for anything that it might possibly hold in the future. Not bad for a bunch of trash. Shout out to everybody who helped me build this or donated materials to the trash shed. My dad, my wife, Patrick, Mike, Paul, Nick, and all of the interesting characters that I met from Marketplace. And lastly, I didn't forget, here's the final cost breakdown. Materials not accounted for so far includes the trim that I found on Marketplace, locally milled pine, the insulation purchased from the guy who gifted me my roofing, and cedar shingle siding, which I have a DIY plan for that won't cost me anything, except for what little I have left of my sanity. That leaves us with a total retail sticker price of $15,454 for my shed as I built it. And let's compare that to what I actually spent, $2,454. A savings of $13,000 or 84%. That's a weirdly round number. Obviously, this accounts for my bougie doors and windows, and doesn't account for any of my extra labor of searching for and acquiring materials, fuel for my big rig, things like that. But as far as I'm concerned, it was far worth it. And all that material saved from the landfill by spending just a little bit more energy with my labor. Plus, the final product sure creates a better story, doesn't it?